Hello and good evening. Welcome to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to the show. This is where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Let's begin with the number of cases of COVID-19 today. Malaysia saw 235 new confirmed cases, the highest daily increase so far. There are now a total of 2,031 COVID cases as of noon today. 4 deaths were also reported today, making the total 23. Now, in other COVID-related news, yesterday it was reported that in Cameron Highlands, farmers were throwing away hundreds of tons of vegetables. And the same thing had apparently happened to fishermen. They had dumped their fish back into the sea because they were unable to send fish to markets in cities. Now, Senior Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob had responded by noting that the police had given their assurance that these supply vehicles will be given easy passage. However, the problem might be in the other ways the MCO affects the supply and delivery of food, including the restriction of workers at markets and operating hours. So tonight on the show, we will be taking a closer look at food supply and food security. Now, to find out the situation on the ground for grocers and supermarkets, we have joining us right now Peter Odle, General Manager of the Food Purveyor, which operates the Village Grocer, Ben's Independent Grocer and Pasaraya OTK. Peter, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, can you begin by sharing with us what you've observed in these past couple of weeks? I mean, what has changed in shoppers' behaviours from before the MCO announcement to now?
Well, good evening. Yes, well, the supermarket industry in Malaysia and worldwide has never experienced anything like this before. We had a small build-up of sales with much fuller trolleys from around Friday the 13th. However, it was on Monday the 16th that we experienced customer volume and sales on an unprecedented scale across all of our stores. Since that Monday, shopping behaviour has definitely changed. No longer ambling down the aisles, taking time in a relaxed fashion to find their purchases, much more focused, driven and determined, and buying a lot more food on each trip. Particularly hard-shopped areas have been canned food, especially canned fish, cooking oil, rice, pasta, eggs, toilet and kitchen paper and bread. And our average trolley value has gone up enormously during this time.
And Peter, could you explain how the supermarkets like yours cope with this spike in demand?
Well, it's been very, very challenging. Operationally, of course. Initially, with the tsunami of customers caused overcrowding in our stores, making it difficult for both our customers to negotiate their shopping trip, but also very, very difficult for our staff to replenish at the rate that the shelves are being emptied as well. But we've been paying particular notification to the latest updates from the MOH, DBKL, and of course government announcements to ensure that we are trading safely and legally as possible and up to date, because it's been very, very fast moving.
Right.
So with that, we've had to introduce a lot of new procedures. Firstly, we had to introduce a crowd control management, overseeing customer flow into our stores, stopping customers when required, with maximum numbers of customers allowed into our stores at any given time. Social distancing has, of course, been very, very important. Difficult to do, as I'm sure you'll understand, in our stores, but we have managed to do it by marking out 1 meter spacing at critical pinch points around our stores. All our shopping trolleys are now sanitized every single time before being given to one of our customers. Hand sanitizer is available at all entrances and all of our checkouts. All of our staff are wearing face masks and gloves. And we have specially allotted shopping hours for our elderly and frail customers. Right. And ensuring all of these important new procedures are in place is now our main priority, and has definitely pushed our operations team to the max, with all other regular operational duties as well, with increased volumes also pushing us hard too.
Peter, you mentioned just now that you're struggling to replenish shelves after you're seeing this spike in demand or this increased demand. Has your supply chain been affected in any way? I mean, for both imported and domestic products?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, well, domestically, with the huge spike in demand that has been relentless since the MCO announcement, and the fact that there are now a lot of roadblocks checking our delivery lorries from both our own DC and also direct from our suppliers, consistency of availability has been compromised. It's really a mixture of short supplies due to exceptional demand and logistical challenges of extra lorries required, longer waiting times at our stores to unload, and extra volumes and queuing at roadblocks. So I believe there is enough product out there, but it's also a balance of the two that's causing issues. Now, for imported products, as we are Malaysia's #1 premium supermarket retailer, we do import a lot of products, particularly from Australia, where we take a lot of meat, fruit and vegetables. Now, due to the increased domestic demand in Australia, there has been far less product available for export. Furthermore, air freight is also more difficult right now with fewer flight slots available.
Peter, what about the message that's been going out from leaders in the country that people should calm down, that in fact there's sufficient amount of food and other kinds of supplies, and that message, do you think, is actually reaching the target audience? I mean, do you see that reflected in any way, at any point in the last 2 weeks? Have you seen that message taken to heart?
Well, actually, I have. Yes, we definitely have, because I think initially it's very difficult for everyone, this situation. We're used to living in a certain way, and having to adapt to a new style of living is so quickly is very difficult and very challenging. But I would say that the vast majority of our customers have been fantastic, and all of these new procedures that we've implemented, they fully understand and actually compliment us in actually taking these steps.
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, you talked about those new procedures a little bit earlier, the crowd control management, the ensuring social distancing. Do you have an SOP in place for if you find a customer that has been exposed to the virus or is a confirmed case? Do you have containment measures for that?
We do, yes, we do. We have contingency measures for all sorts of scenarios, and this is just one of them, yes.
What will you do to the shop, the supermarkets and the grocers, if you find you've confirmed a case where the customer is a COVID positive shopper?
Well, obviously, we would advise the customer to isolate and seek medical attention, and if this were to happen in one of our stores, then we would shut it down for a certain period of time while we completely disinfect and cleanse the store before opening again. Yeah.
Okay, and in the last couple of minutes that we have left, Peter, what advice do you have for shoppers going about, the only respite, of course, in this past 9 days or so has been going to buy, to stock up on supplies at the grocers. Yeah. What advice do you have for shoppers in the next coming weeks? Well,
I have a few things I'd like to say. First of all, only leave your house if it's really, really important. And ideally, one shopper at a time is always best, and the rest of the family can stay at home to minimize the risk of infection, whether that be a driver or a maid or other members of your family. Always wear a face mask and gloves if possible, and try to wash your hands with sanitizer as often as you can. But please shop responsibly and consider other consumers. There is plenty of food to feed Malaysia, I promise you. And please eat lots of healthy food to boost your immune system and stay healthy.
All right, thank you so much for joining us and sharing those insights with us. We're going to take a quick break and continue our look at the food supply and food security here in Malaysia. Back with more on Consider This. Stay tuned.
Bila sentuh soal berita,
welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Now let's continue our look at food supply and food security during this MCO period and of course beyond. What goes into ensuring Malaysia's food supply is sufficient? We have joining us on the line now Dr Sarena Che Omar, Senior Research Associate of Khazanah Research Institute. Sarena, good evening. Welcome to the show. Now, were we prepared for this pandemic in terms of food security? And in all honesty, can any country be prepared?
Well, to a certain extent, we can do whatever we can to be prepared, but we always will have a certain amount of panic buying happening in Malaysia. And there's always this issue of whether there's going to be enough food available in Malaysia. And as we know, during our movement control order, there were several incidences of panic buying, and that we now notice that there's an extra focus on fresh goods as people anticipating that they're going to be cooking more food. So in terms of country, there should be enough food. However, as I'm not going to go too much into the number, but I just want our audience to reflect for a bit. Just before our COVID-19 outbreak, things were business as usual. Were there any shortages of eggs, chicken, or vegetables? No, there weren't. And were there any incidences to suggest that there were shortages, such as, for example, a death of our farm chickens, or maybe our paddy fields were burned down? No. So if things were to go as usual, normally, with the same amount of population, there should be enough food and people shouldn't panic. But the problem happens when there is hoarding and panic buying. So as long as our farmers can safely farm according to the COVID-19 protection measures, yes, we should stay calm that there should be enough food available for the country. But the key question is, though, is that can that food travel from the consumers to the from the farm to the consumers during this MCO period? That is the question we should be asking.
Sarena, in fact, what we've, we started the show by noting some news reports that talked about vegetables being dumped and fish being dumped, and the problems or the hurdles that the supply chain seems to be having, including a restriction on hours for markets and restriction on workers at those markets. Are those elements all part of a plan that should have been put in place even before we had this pandemic?
Well, I guess sometimes it's a bit hard to anticipate, but what is real and for sure is that we should react quite quickly. So I hope with the establishment of the task force comprising of the Ministry of Trade, Domestic Trade and Agriculture, I hope they can target these weak linkages, address it quickly so that there is the food that is produced at the farm can actually arrive to us, the consumers. Because the issue now is not that there's not enough food, but it's that the food is not traveling to us. And there could be breakages because people operating in there could be wondering whether, are they allowed to go out? Are they not allowed to go out? They are also afraid of COVID-19. So all these things, we should plan quickly to ensure that food supply continues coming into the country, into the supermarkets in Malaysia.
Well, okay, you mentioned, food supply coming to the country. I wanted to talk a little bit about the import side. I mean, is our food supply import dependent? Because I think a couple of days ago we saw news reports that Vietnam had decided to suspend rice exports to ensure their food security. Malaysia, as I understand it, is a net food importer. Is that right? Dr. Sarena, can you comment?
Okay, thank you, Melisa. That's a really good question because people are always talking about, we are importing a lot of food. What do we do? And I don't blame them because our food import bill now stands at 60 billion ringgit. But what we don't realize, Melisa, is that thanks to economic growth and prosperity, we are importing more diversified and expensive foods. So, for example, I noticed that over the 10-year period, we are increasing the import of luxury items, food items such as strawberries, expensive chocolates, avocados, salmon, as well as beef. So it's not surprising that our import bill is at 60 billion. But right there is that when it comes to our essential food items such as rice, eggs, chicken, meat, pig meat, vegetables, we are in fact 60 to almost 100%, in some cases more than 100% self-sufficient. So to answer your question, in terms of essential food items, we are not so much import dependent. But in terms of premium or diversified food items, yes, we are import dependent.
Sarena, do you expect that people will give up these comfort foods? I know chocolate's very important for me in a crisis.
Strawberries even?
Strawberries, I know, not my thing. But do you think you can expect people to change their behavior in terms of what they consume and maybe need to get some advice about how they should consume differently under these conditions?
Well, first of all, yes, they should. First of all, it is also about affordability, right? If you can afford the expensive food, go ahead and buy them. What is important is not to tip the balance of what is going on before COVID-19, which is people were purchasing and there is a balance of supply and demand. What we don't want during the MCO is people to hoard and panic and buy a lot of food and they end up wasting it. And the problem here, Sharaad, the problem here is that not only will the food be replenished, prices will skyrocket, but most sadly of all, we will deprive the vulnerable communities from accessing these foods. So we got to make sure that we don't just think about ourselves here.
I want to come back to the problems that you pointed out when it comes to ensuring food gets from the farmers to the supermarkets to consumers. And within that supply chain, there could be multiple points that are sensitive to crises, such as this one. For instance, could you elaborate a little bit on the challenges to access both logistics and transport, and also what the impact is to the access for affordability and price?
Okay, so let's go back to food supply chain. What is supply chain in the first place, right? So supply chain is a network of activities involved to move that food from the farm to the consumers. So it involves transport, it involves manufacturing, wholesale, branding, packaging, and selling it at the local supermarket. So that is what supply chain is. Now, Melisa, imagine this. Even if our farmers can produce enough vegetables, in Cameron Highlands, they can produce enough for the whole country, but there's no lorry to carry the vegetables from the farm to the packaging site. Even that alone, the food may not end up coming to us. The supply chain is broken. So every part of the supply chain is really crucial, is really important. So after the food arrives at the packaging site, it needs to be transported. The transport is just as important. Wholesaling is just as important as well. And the efficiency of supermarkets in restocking their goods is also important factors. So the key here is to identify these segments, look at each food item. So we need to choose. You can't go like every food item, right? You got to choose the key food items here. So for example, chicken. Identify the supply chain, look at what's going on and where are the weak linkages, and fix the weak linkages to make sure that the food arrives. Otherwise, there will be issues with supply as well as prices that will skyrocket, unless we control the prices, of course.
All right, I mean, this is a very interesting conversation, but we're going to take a quick break, come back and continue this conversation with Dr. Sarena Che Omar from Khazanah Research Institute. Stay tuned to consider this. Thank you for staying with us on Consider This. But if you've just joined us, we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Sarena Che Omar, Senior Research Associate at Khazanah Research Institute. Sarena, I want to come back to something you mentioned before the break about looking at the supply chain. Now, I'm wondering whether you have observed anything specific in the current movement control order that has been hindering the smooth the smooth operation of the supply chain. Have you picked up anything that has had unintended consequences down the line?
You mean whether I've heard directly from what happened?
Or observed, yes.
Not observed, but the things that I heard, and I'm quite happy that this was rectified quite quickly. But for example, the paddy farmers, they harvested their paddy grains, and there were incidences whereby the lorry that was supposed to carry the harvested paddy was stopped because, it was the movement control order. So it was stopped from going to the factory. But I was told that this was rectified quite quickly, and after that, people could continue on harvesting, and the lorries could function. So at least in terms of the supply of paddy, I don't think there's anything to be worried about.
What about, Sarena, the orders that change the nature of the work at the market? So, for instance, not allowing numbers of the regular numbers of workers, the shorter hours, operating hours. Are those things that actually might not be good in the long run?
In the long run? In the long run, right? Even after MCO, I think it should go back to normal. But are you talking about reducing the number of people during the MCO?
Yes, during the MCO.
During the MCO, yeah, I suppose they will have to take measures to reduce the number of people in contact with each other. But I think they'll just have to come up with ways to increase efficiency or to find ways to compensate in ways. Because there's always going to be a compensation here if you're going to try to control the outbreak of COVID-19. Comparing that to people who still need to go out, they still need to drive the trucks, they still need to pass food around. So, yeah, there's going to be some compromise. But as long as the food flows, we hope that happens. At least it flows, not a complete halt.
Well, there seems to be, as you pointed out a bit earlier, Sarena, an extra focus on fresh food at the moment, right? Because, you know, fresh produce doesn't keep, you have to keep going out and buying some more. I'm wondering, in the event, as what we've observed under this MCO, have people been consuming different types of food and the impact that food insecurity might have on nutrition?
Well, I don't have the numbers right now, so I don't know how people are consuming. So I can't really answer you that. But I can give you a little scenario about what food security is, and then I think that might try to answer your question. So people always think that food security is about food being available. If the food is in front of you, it's available, that's food security. But Melisa, food security is way beyond that. It is multidimensional. It is also about whether you can afford it, whether you can purchase it, you know how to cook it, and even if you cook it, you are able to extract the nutrition and cook it in a hygienic way. Let me give you a bit of an example here. Imagine that we can produce all the rice for Malaysia in Langkawi, but imagine the boat is broken. So that is a food security issue because we are not able to bring the rice into Kuala Lumpur. But imagine there's the boat and we can bring it in, but the price is too high. That again is a food security issue because you cannot afford the rice. But what if you can afford the rice, but you don't know how to cook the rice? Again, it's a food security issue. Now, interestingly enough, imagine that you can cook it, but you only eat rice every single day throughout the MCO. No chicken, no vegetables, no fruits. That is a food security issue because you're not eating a healthy diet. To put it simply, if there's all the food, all the most healthiest food in front of your door, but if you choose to cook instant noodles for your kids every day, it's still a food security issue.
That's right.
Sarena, very quickly, could you help us understand? You're saying that the MCO will need to tweak its orders in order to respond to some unintended consequences of the conditions they've laid out. Is there monitoring going on? Who's doing the monitoring? And is it actually optimal?
Well, it's hard to say because no one predicted this, right? So I think it is more of a reactory system where the ministry is looking at what's happening and then they react to it. So I think, and to be fair, nobody expected this. So it's more of a reaction base. And I hope that the task force that is being implemented, they are able to come in and to strengthen the weak linkages within the supply chain. And also one more thing I want to add here is that we always tend to forget about our invisible communities. These are our migrant workers and our refugees. I hope that the task force is able to not only look at the food supply chain for us Malaysians, but also look at the food supply chain for refugees and the migrant workers because they would have a different set of supply chain and they're just as important here in Malaysia.
Yes, thank you so much for pointing that out. That is a very pertinent point to remember those invisible, the invisible community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Sarena. Pleasure speaking with you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. Join us tomorrow for another edition at 10 p.m. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for this evening. As always, stay home and stay safe, folks. Thanks for watching.